The champagne flute shattered against the marble fireplace about 3 seconds after my father finished introducing me as his waste of space, but nobody heard it because they were all too busy choking on their laughter. Let me back up. My name is Rebecca Carver Hayes. I'm 26 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the daughter that every philanthropic society in Atlanta wanted on their gala committee, until my mother's body was found at the bottom of our own swimming pool, and the word accident stopped meaning anything I could trust. That's the part nobody at this party knows yet, which is why when my father, Prescott Hayes, stood up in his $5,000 Tom Ford tuxedo and clinked his knife against a baccarat crystal glass, I already had a burner phone in my clutch and a rental car waiting 3 blocks away. He said, "I'd like to introduce my daughter Rebecca. No degree, no future, just free rides off the family." And the room erupted like I'd told the joke myself. My stepmother, Victoria, laughed the loudest, her collagen lips stretched so tight I thought they might crack, and my half-brother Cooper, all 17 years of his privileged pill-popping existence, actually pointed at me like I was the halftime entertainment. I didn't flinch. That's the thing about being the smartest person in a room full of Atlanta's old money. You learn to save your face for when it actually matters. I lifted my glass, let the Chardonnay catch the chandelier light, and said, "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will see me." Then I walked out through the French doors, across the limestone terrace, past the koi pond where my mother used to feed the fish every morning before she stopped leaving her bedroom entirely, and I didn't look back even once. The silence hit behind me like a physical thing, that kind of vacuum that happens when 300 people suddenly realize they might have just watched something real underneath the performance. But here's what I want you to understand right now. I wasn't running away. I was walking towards something I'd been building for 8 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, ever since the paramedics pulled my mother's body from the water, and my father's first call wasn't to a grief counselor, but to his lawyer. You want to know what humiliation feels like? Try having your own blood stand in front of Atlanta's entire philanthropic elite, the Buckhead wives, the Techwood venture capitalists, the senators and the wannabe senators, and reduce your entire existence to a punchline about financial dependency. Prescott Hayes built his name on real estate development, 30 years of historic properties into luxury condos and calling it preservation. He's the kind of man who believes love is a line item on a balance sheet and loyalty is just another word for leverage. 2 years ago, when I dropped out of my PhD program at Emory because my mother's health was failing and somebody needed to be in that house with her 24/7, he told me I was making a strategic error. Those were his exact words. Not, "I'm sorry you're scared," not, "we'll get through this together," just a cold assessment of my diminishing value as a daughter who might one day be useful for mergers and social climbing. But here's the hook you need to sink your teeth into. My mother didn't fall into that pool. I know because I was the one who found the security footage that had been deleted from the main server, but not from the backup drive that her private nurse, Delia, had been smart enough to hide. And I know because the night before she died, my mother handed me a manila envelope with the words, "If something happens," written in her shapy handwriting. And inside was every dirty secret Prescott Hayes had spent 28 years of marriage burying under shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. I didn't open it for 3 days because I was too busy planning a funeral and pretending to grieve for a man who cried exactly twice, once at the memorial service when the cameras were rolling, and once when he realized her will left everything to a trust that I control until Cooper turns 25. That's the real joke of the night. My father thinks I'm broke and useless, but I've been liquidating assets for 7 months under a holding company he's never heard of. And the money he stole from my mother's family's textile business, I found the offshore accounts. I found the secret partnership with a developer in Savannah. I found the photographs of Victoria that dated back to before my mother's accident, which means the affair started at least 2 years earlier than anyone suspected. And tonight, while he was busy humiliating me in front of his investors and his mistress-turned-wife, I had already triggered the first domino, a certified letter delivered to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, an anonymous tip about improper evidence handling in the initial death investigation, and a subpoena that would be waiting for him on his desk by Monday. The drive from the Hayes estate on West Paces Ferry to the Buckhead Ritz-Carlton took 11 minutes. I spent every second of it watching my rear-view mirror, not because I thought he'd follow me. Prescott Hayes doesn't chase, he summons, but because I needed to memorize the shape of that house receding behind me. 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a wine cellar that held more value than most people's retirement accounts, and a ghost in every room. My mother's ghost. She used to say that money doesn't change who you are, it just makes you more of whatever you already were, and I used to think that was a lesson about generosity. Now I know it was a warning about cruelty. Prescott was always cruel, but the money gave him architecture to hide it behind. He didn't hit, he erased. He didn't scream, he starved. For the last 3 years of her life, my mother ate dinner alone in a sunroom while he hosted parties in the ballroom, and when she asked for a divorce, he threatened to have her declared mentally incompetent, which, given her history of what doctors called anxiety, and I now understand was a slow, systematic gaslighting campaign, might have actually worked. That's the part that makes my blood run cold even now. He almost got away with it. If I hadn't found the envelope, if I hadn't spent 4 months tracking the money trail through 3 different forensic accountants, if I hadn't befriended the forensic technician who originally processed the pool deck and heard her admit over too many glasses of wine that the lividity pattern on my mother's body didn't match a simple fall, if any of those threads had been missing, I would still be standing in that ballroom, smiling through the humiliation, believing my own mother slipped on wet tile and drowned while my father slept peacefully upstairs. But here's where the story twists again. The person who pushed her wasn't my father. I didn't figure that out until 3 weeks ago, when I finally hacked into Victoria's personal email and found the message she sent to her sister the morning after the funeral. It's done. He doesn't know I was even there. Make sure the story about the Ambien folds up. The Ambien. My mother's prescription, which she'd been taking for insomnia since the affair started, and Prescott began coming home at 2 a.m. smelling of expensive perfume and lies. The toxicology report showed traces in her system, enough to make her drowsy, but not enough to kill her, and certainly not enough to explain the bruising on her wrists that the paramedics noted, but the official report somehow omitted. Somebody held her down. Somebody waited until she was too weak to fight back. And that somebody wasn't Prescott Hayes, because Prescott Hayes was on a business trip in Charlotte, which I confirmed with airline records, hotel receipts, and a phone call to his assistant that I recorded and saved in 3 different locations. He didn't push her, but he created the world where the push was possible. He paid for the house, the pool, the isolation, the fear, the silence. He put Victoria in position. He gave her the keys, and the motive, and the alibi. And then he looked at his daughter across a dining room table 2 days after the funeral and said, "We should talk about your future, Rebecca. You can't live here forever." I checked into the Ritz under a fake name, Sarah Mitchell, a nod to my mother's maiden name, and ordered a club sandwich I had no intention of eating. The room was on the 10th floor, facing south, and I watched the Atlanta skyline glitter like a mouthful of stolen diamonds while I waited for my phone to ring. It rang at 9:47 p.m., exactly when I expected. "Ms. Carver, this is Detective Rojas from the GBI. I'm calling about the letter you submitted regarding the Elizabeth Carver case." I didn't correct him on the name. My mother kept Carver after marriage, a small rebellion that Prescott never forgave, and I've always thought that was the first sign of the war between them, the one she lost because she didn't realize she was fighting until it was already over. "I'd like to come in for an interview," I said. "I have evidence that wasn't included in the original file." There was a pause, the kind that tells you the person on the other end is deciding whether to take you seriously. "How did you get this number?" he asked. I smiled at my reflection in the dark window. "I have a friend in the DA's office who owes me a favor, and I have a flash drive with deleted security footage, a chain of custody violation, and a witness who's willing to testify that the pool deck was retiled 3 days before the incident. Do you want to meet tomorrow, or should I go to the FBI?" Another pause, longer this time. "10 a.m. Don't be late." He hung up before I could respond, which was fine because I didn't need to. I'd already set the next domino in motion, and the one after that, and the one after that. By the time Detective Rojas saw my evidence, I would have already leaked the affair to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution through a burner email account that routed through 3 different VPNs. By the time Prescott's voyeur called him with the news, I would have already transferred the final piece of my mother's fortune into an irrevocable trust that neither Prescott nor Cooper nor Victoria could touch. And by the time the party ended and the guests went home, and the silence in that ballroom became the story that everyone whispered about over brunch the next morning, I would be somewhere else entirely. Not hiding, just waiting. Because revenge isn't about running, it's about letting the trap close slowly enough that the person inside doesn't realize they're caught until they hear the lock turn. Here's what I haven't told you yet. The envelope my mother gave me didn't just contain financial records and love letters. It contained a DNA test, not for Prescott, but for me. Elizabeth Carver, in her last months of life, had begun to doubt everything, including whether the daughter she raised was biologically related to the man she married. The test said yes, I was his, which was a relief and a horror in equal measure. But there was another test in the envelope, one she'd run without telling anyone, using a strand of hair from Cooper's brush and a cheek swab from Prescott's coffee cup. And that one came back negative.
Cooper Hayes, my father's beloved son, the boy he'd showered with private schools and luxury cars and a trust fund that kicked in at 18, was not Prescott Hayes's biological child, which means Victoria's affair didn't start 2 years ago. It started at least 18 years ago, with a man whose name my mother never discovered, but whose genetic legacy was currently snorting Adderall in my father's ballroom and laughing at her half-sister like she was the family disappointment. I haven't told you this until now because I needed you to understand the full scope of what Prescott destroyed. He didn't just lose a wife, he lost a son who was never his. He built his entire legacy on a lie, and the only person who knew the truth was the woman he drove into the ground. And now me. I am the keeper of every secret, every betrayal, every hidden account and falsified document and midnight email. I am the one who watched my mother fade from a brilliant textile heiress into a ghost who wore the same bathrobe for 3 weeks straight and jumped every time the garage door opened. I am the one who sat beside her hospital bed after her accidental overdose, the first one 2 years before the pool, the one Prescott said was a cry for attention, and promised her that if anything ever happened, I would burn it all down. She laughed. She thought I was being dramatic. She kissed my forehead and said, "You're too good for this family, Becca. Promise me you'll leave." But I didn't promise that. I promised something else. I promised I would stay long enough to make sure nobody ever forgot her name. And tonight, walking out of that ballroom with the sound of silence crashing behind me, I finally started keeping that promise. But here's the rehook that will keep you reading. I didn't just walk out, I took something with me. Something from Prescott's private safe, the one behind the painting in his study, the combination I watched him enter when he thought I was asleep on the couch after my mother's funeral. Inside that safe was a flash drive labeled Project Horizon, and on that flash drive was everything: the money laundering, the bribery, the construction kickbacks, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, and one file labeled EC that I haven't been able to open because it's encrypted with a password I can't crack. That file is why I'm at the Ritz instead of on a plane to anywhere else.
That file is what I whispered to my mother's grave this morning when nobody was watching. That file is the difference between exposing Prescott Hayes and destroying him completely. And tomorrow morning, when I walk into the GBI office with my flash drive and my witness statements and my 8 months of obsessive documentation, I'm going to ask Detective Rojas one question. What happens when the victim's daughter is smarter than everyone who failed her mother the first time? But the party isn't over yet, because while I was sitting in that hotel room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 3 words: "You shouldn't have." I typed back, "Shouldn't have what?" The response came 30 seconds later. "Walked out. He knows about the GBI, he knows about the flash drive, and he knows about Cooper." I dropped the phone like it was on fire. Somebody in that ballroom wasn't laughing. Somebody was watching. Somebody followed me to the car and listened to my phone calls, and maybe, just maybe, has been feeding Prescott information for weeks. Which means I'm not the hunter anymore. I'm the hunted. And the trap I thought I was setting, it might have been baited with my own blood all along. The text came from a number I didn't recognize, but the phrasing was unmistakably victorious, that specific brand of passive-aggressive menace she'd perfected over 18 years of playing the long game.
You shouldn't have, meaning you shouldn't have threatened what's mine, meaning you shouldn't have touched Cooper, meaning you definitely shouldn't have walked out of that party, because now I have to clean up your mess, and I don't like getting my hands dirty. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for exactly 60 seconds, breathing in that chemical lavender scent of luxury hotel laundry detergent, and I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. I called the only person in Atlanta I still trusted, Delia, my mother's private nurse, the woman who'd found the backup security footage and hidden it in a storage unit under her grandmother's name. Delia answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting for my call. "He had the study swept for bugs 2 hours after you left," she said, her voice low and fast. "Found the recorder you hid behind the bookcase. He knows everything, Becca. He knows about the GBI tip, he knows about the DNA test, and he knows you have the Horizon file." My stomach dropped. Project Horizon wasn't just money laundering, it was the blueprint for Prescott's next 10 years, a massive development deal on the Atlanta Beltline that depended on bribing 3 city council members and falsifying environmental impact reports. If that file went public, Prescott Hayes didn't just lose his reputation, he lost his freedom. And men like Prescott Hayes don't lose freedom quietly. They lose it fighting, which means they lose it hurting everyone around them first. "Where are you?" I asked Delia. "I'm at my sister's place in Decatur. But Becca, listen to me. Victoria called someone after the party. I overheard her in the kitchen when I went back to get my last paycheck. She said, 'It's time to finish what we started.' Then she mentioned a name." Delia paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "She mentioned your mother's maiden name, Carver. She said, 'The Carver girl is the problem, and we should have handled her the same way.'" The same way. 3 words that turned my blood to ice water. The same way meant the pool. The same way meant my mother's body floating face down while Victoria stood on the deck and watched. The same way meant that I wasn't just dealing with a manipulative stepmother. I was dealing with a murderer who had already killed once and was apparently very open to doing it again. Here's what I haven't told you about the night my mother died. I was in the house. I was upstairs, in my childhood bedroom, packing boxes because Prescott had given me 60 days to move out, and I was trying to do it quietly to avoid another fight. I heard the splash. I remember thinking it was the fountain in the courtyard, which sometimes sputtered and spat water in the summer heat. I didn't go check. I didn't look out the window.
I just kept folding sweaters and sealing boxes, and by the time I went downstairs for a glass of water, the pool was calm, and the courtyard was empty, and my mother's bedroom door was closed. I assumed she was asleep. That's what I told the police. That's what I told myself for 3 months. Until Delia showed me the footage, and I had to confront the fact that I'd heard my mother's death and done nothing. The guilt nearly killed me. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started seeing her face in every reflective surface, the bathroom mirror, the darkened television screen, the surface of my coffee before I took the first sip. But guilt is a useless emotion unless you turn it into action, so I turned it into a plan. 8 months of planning, 8 months of watching Prescott and Victoria play happy family while I smiled and nodded and cashed checks that I funneled directly into my revenge fund.
8 months of pretending to be the useless, degreeless, futureless daughter so that nobody would see the knife until it was already between their ribs. And now Victoria knew, which meant the knife had to move faster than I'd planned. I left the Ritz at 11:30 p.m., took the service elevator to the parking garage and switched cars 3 times. First the rental, then an Uber to a MARTA station, then a lift to a friend's apartment in Inman Park, where I'd stashed a second vehicle, a nondescript Honda Civic that didn't appear in any of my financial records. Paranoia is expensive, but so is being dead. By midnight, I was parked outside the Hayes estate on West Pace's ferry, watching the lights flicker through the magnolia trees. The party was over, the guests were gone, but every window on the second floor was lit up like a confessional, and I knew without having to see that Prescott and Victoria were in the master bedroom, arguing about what to do with me. I wanted to hear that argument, so I did something incredibly stupid and incredibly necessary. I used the key I'd copied 6 months ago, let myself in through the garden entrance, and crept up the back staircase to the study adjacent to their bedroom. The walls in this house are thick, but the heating vents carry sound like a telephone line, and I pressed my ear against the grate just in time to hear Victoria say, "She can't prove anything. The footage is gone. The nurse is lying, and the DNA test is a fake. We'll say she manufactured it to get attention." Prescott's voice was quieter, which meant he was angrier. "She has the Horizon file, Victoria. Do you understand what that means? If that file goes to the GBI, I'm looking at 15 years, minimum." A long pause. Then Victoria's voice again, softer now, almost tender. "Then we make sure the file never reaches the GBI. Rebecca is emotional. Rebecca is grieving. Rebecca is a troubled young woman who tried to destroy her father's reputation because she couldn't accept her mother's accident." I heard footsteps, the creak of the floorboard directly above the vent. "And if she doesn't back down?" Prescott asked. Victoria laughed. It was the same laugh I'd heard at the party, but this time there was no audience to perform for. "Then Rebecca has another accident, a car crash maybe, a gas leak, a robbery gone wrong. Atlanta is a dangerous city, darling. Wealthy young women get hurt all the time." I pulled away from the vent so fast I knocked over a lamp. The crash echoed through the study like a gunshot, and for one terrible second I froze. Then I ran. Down the back staircase, through the garden, over the wall by the koi pond. I didn't stop until I was in the Honda Civic with the doors locked and my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove. I didn't know where. I just drove, through the empty streets of Buckhead, past the shuttered boutiques and the sleeping mansions and the churches with their flood-lit steeples, and I screamed until my throat was raw and my eyes were dry, because I'd already cried every tear I had for my mother, and there were none left for me. But here's the thing about being the Carver girl. My mother's family didn't raise quitters. Elizabeth Carver lost her fight because she was alone, because Prescott had isolated her from her friends, her money, her support system, her sense of reality. I wasn't alone. I had Delia. I had the forensic accountant in Savannah who owed me a favor. I had the journalist at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who'd been investigating Prescott for years, but never had enough evidence to print.
And I had something my mother never had, a copy of the Horizon file, encrypted and hidden in 3 separate locations with a dead man's switch that would release everything to the FBI if I didn't check in every 72 hours. Prescott and Victoria could kill me, but they couldn't kill the truth. They couldn't stop the dominoes I'd already set in motion. And they definitely couldn't undo what I did next, which was drive straight to the 24-hour FedEx office on Piedmont Road and email the entire Horizon file, unencrypted, unredacted, undeniable, to every single person who'd been at that party. 300 people, 300 inboxes, 300 witnesses to Prescott Hayes' destruction. I hit send at 1:23 a.m., and then I sat in the parking lot and watched the little progress bar crawl across the screen, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months. Peace. Not happiness. Happiness was for people who hadn't watched their mother get murdered and their father turn out to be a monster. But peace. Peace was the knowledge that I'd done everything I could, that the rest was out of my hands, that whatever happened next, I'd already won. The fallout was faster than I expected. By 7 a.m., my phone had melted down with text messages, voicemails, and social media notifications. By 9 a.m., the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had posted a breaking news alert. Prominent developer Prescott Hayes accused of bribery, fraud, and evidence tampering in wife's death. By 11 a.m., the GBI had executed a search warrant on the Hayes estate, and I watched from a coffee shop across the street as Victoria was led out in handcuffs, not for the fraud, not for the bribery, but for the murder of Elizabeth Carver, thanks to a sworn statement from Delia and the security footage I'd preserved on that flash drive. Cooper called me from jail. Apparently his Adderall prescription wasn't as legal as he thought, and the search turned up enough pills to charge him with intent to distribute. He was crying. He asked me to bail him out. I told him to ask his real father, hung up and blocked the number. That was the last time I spoke to anyone with the last name Hayes. But this story isn't about justice. Justice is what happens in courtrooms, and courtrooms are slow and messy and full of technicalities. This story is about revenge, and revenge is what happens when a daughter finally stops protecting the people who destroyed her mother. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't frame anyone. I didn't lie or cheat or steal. I just collected the truth and laid it out like a feast, and I let Prescott and Victoria and Cooper eat every single bite. That's the moral, if there is one. The truth doesn't need to be fast or flashy or violent. It just needs to be patient. It just needs to wait for the right moment, and then it needs to be undeniable. My mother didn't have that patience. She tried to fight Prescott while she was still inside his house, still dependent on his money, still believing that if she just found the right evidence, he would finally see her pain and stop. But abusers don't stop because you prove them wrong. They stop because you take away their power. And you take away their power by exposing them to a world that doesn't owe them anything. The world doesn't care about Prescott Hayes' reputation. The world doesn't care about Victoria's social standing or Cooper's trust fund. The world cares about facts, and I gave the world a mountain of facts so high that nobody could pretend not to see. 6 months later, I'm sitting on a balcony in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the sun set over the harbor. I bought this condo with money from my mother's trust, money Prescott couldn't touch, Money he'd spent 28 years trying to steal. Money that was always mine. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know the whole story, not just the headlines. The headlines say Prescott Hayes was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, 3 counts of bribery, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. They say Victoria Hayes was convicted of second-degree murder and will serve a minimum of 20 years. They say Cooper Hayes pleaded guilty to drug charges and is in a rehabilitation facility that his real father, a construction foreman from Macon who came forward after the DNA test went public, is paying for with money he doesn't have. The headlines don't say that I still dream about my mother every night. They don't say that I wake up reaching for her hand, or that I keep her photograph on my nightstand and talk to her before I go to sleep. They don't say that revenge doesn't fill the hole where love used to be, and that justice doesn't bring anyone back. But they also don't say that I'm okay, that I'm better than okay, that I'm free in a way I haven't been since I was a little girl, before Prescott started chipping away at my mother's spirit and my own. I'm starting a foundation in her name, the Elizabeth Carver Center for Domestic Abuse Survivors, and I'm using every penny of Prescott's forfeited assets to fund it. That's the final domino. That's the one I didn't even know I was setting until it fell. Every time some woman walks through those doors and gets the help she needs, my mother will live again. Every time a daughter learns to fight back before it's too late, my mother will win. Prescott Hayes wanted to erase Elizabeth Carver from the world. Instead, I made sure she'll never be forgotten. And the last time anyone saw me at that party, walking out with my head high and my glass lifted, that wasn't an ending, that was a beginning. Because the Carver girl didn't disappear, the Carver girl went to war, and the Carver girl won. Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.